ES Audio.
Hello, you're listening to the Evening Standard Theatre Podcast. I'm Nick Curtis, the Standard's Chief Theatre Critic.
I'm Nancy Durrant, the Culture Editor.
And I'm Nick Clark, the Deputy Culture Editor.
This week we're coming to you from the Duke of York's Theatre on St Martin's Lane.
I do love the West End on a sunny day. It's so sort of grimy and bright. Before we go in, this is what's coming up on today's show.
We'll be reviewing The Secret Life of Bees at the Almeida. It's a new musical based on the novel by Sue Monk Kidd and directed by Whitney White.
It's the symphony of wings in 1,000 different keys, mysterious and wonderful, the secret life of bees, and no matter where they fly.
The book for that show is by Lynn Nottage, with music and lyrics from Duncan Shake and Susan Birkenhead.
Plus, we'll be discussing Private Lives at the Donmar Warehouse, starring Rachel Sterling and Stephen Mangan, as well as Downton Abbey's Laura Carmichael.
And Sir Lenny Henry and director Lynette Linton join us to talk about their forthcoming show at the Bush Theatre, August in England.
This was genuinely inspired by reading the story of the lady who worked at the Commons who was suddenly told she didn't have leave to remain, or Michael Braithwaite, who was an incredibly valued teacher of special needs kids, who was just told he had to get out because he was an illegal immigrant.
Previews for that begin on April 28th.
Should we get this show on the road?
Hello and welcome to the Evening Standard Theatre Podcast. Today we're coming to you from the lounge of the Duke of York's Theatre on St Martin's Lane, which is currently home to Shirley Valentine, starring Sheridan Smith.
That's easy for you to say. We reviewed that show on a previous episode, so make sure to go and dig that out. The sales for Shirley Valentine have been extremely good.
Yeah, record profits apparently, they said this week. And even though actually the tickets are quite affordable, kind of, comparatively speaking. I think they were sort of started on top price of $75 when they first went on sale. I don't know if that's still the case.
David Pugh, the producer, said that when he started out they were £75 but down to £7.50, which is really affordable. And I know these things are all relative. Somebody within theatre did once say to me that David Pugh is one of the few theatre producers who comes from a relatively working class background and has therefore a commitment to keeping ticket prices low. And even though I had reservations about the play Shirley Valentine, I think Sheridan Smith's performance is extraordinary, and I think its success is extremely well deserved.
Shows the power of the Sheridan Smith.
It does. It does, yes.
Just to say, you may hear some acting in the background. We're recording in the Ambassador's Lounge today because there is a rehearsal going on in the auditorium.
And this just wasn't any old lounge. This was once the Royal Retiring Room. It was used as a private space for visiting royalty to relax in, so we're feeling very at home here today.
This theatre was originally called the Trafalgar Theatre and was renamed the Duke of York's to honour King George V, so not our current Duke of York. It was built by architect Walter Emden, who is one of the preeminent West End theatre architects, for Frank Wyatt and his wife Violet Melnott, who we are told by the front of house staff here sometimes still haunts this very bar. So if you hear some woos as well as acting from the stage, that'll be Violet Melnott. They owned the theatre up until 1935. Capital Radio owned this theatre at one point for a time. It's now part of Ambassador's Theatre Group.
Oh, right. Interesting.
There we go.
Nick, you went to the Critics' Circle Awards this week, didn't you?
Yeah, it was a really nice award ceremony. I've never been to it before. And there were some really special winners and some lovely speeches. One that stands out is Patsy Ferran, who obviously is fast becoming the national treasure of Theatreland. But what was very funny is while she was giving her acceptance speech, and I should say Paul Mescal and Jennifer San were both there as a surprise to give it to her.
Yeah, because this is for Streetcar.
This is, I should say, Best Actress for Streetcar for playing Blanche Dubois. And in the middle of her speech, a phone went off. So it shows that not just normal punters, but the critics can't turn their ruddy mobile phones off either. But what was very funny is that she said that quite recently, while she was just getting to the most famous line in Tennessee Williams about I've always relied on the kindness of strangers, she had just paused and
Secret of comedy is timing,
yeah,
isn't it?
well,
Yeah.
quite.
I missed the awards this year, which is a shame. I think they have tried to rejuvenate them a bit and make them more of an event this year and last year. The Critics' Circle is the oldest professional association of its kind, I'm told. I don't exactly know what of its kind means. Maybe it
Critics' Circle.
beats the Magic
Critics'
Circle. I've always thought that the Magic Circle and the Critics' Circle should have a bit of a gang war and establish dominance over London, but yeah, nobody else seems to find that.
It was held at Soho Place, and it was on the stage of Medea, so it felt suitably theatrical. It was
fabulous.
in the round. And yeah, it was great. It was a real celebration of theatre, and there were very many other worthy winners. Giles Torreira gave an excellent speech, and he won for 2 performances in Blues for an Alabama Sky and Othello.
Both excellent.
Oh, and you can hear you interview. No, Nick.
I
Other Nick.
interviewed him
You interviewed
in our last
him
podcast.
in our last podcast. Yeah, have a
for,
listen.
for a meaning of song. Yes.
And of course, Tyrell Williams, who won the most promising playwright for Red Pitch, which I think everyone agreed was a really wonderful piece of work.
Yes, he won our Evening Standard Award for that last year and won again at the Critics' Circle Awards. So we've just heard that show is coming back to the Bush along with Elephant by Anushka Lucas. Both of them terrific shows. Both of them, I think, deserving of a second run at the Bush, but also of a larger, longer life somewhere else, if possible. So if any producers are listening out there,
get on it.
Get on it.
Absolutely.
The last thing is they've reinstated the Peterborough Empty Space Award,
Yes.
and I think they could have found no better first recipient for the revived award within the Critics' Circle.
What does that mean, the Empty Space
So it was for a
Award?
venue, and I don't think
Right.
the critics, there hadn't been an award for a venue before, is what I understood.
I think that's right. I think the Peterborough Empty Space Award was a separate thing that was
It was
set
completely
up by,
separate,
set
and
up
they
by
sort
Blanche
of
Marvin.
during the
Right,
they've
okay.
subsumed it. And Blanche was there, I think, at the age of she's certainly late 90s, and gave a formidable performance in speaking about the award and about the winner. And the winner was New Diorama, and I think we've again we should never pass up on an opportunity to give them their flowers. And they've just appeared in the New York Times.
Yes, I saw that. Yes,
so
amazing.
good. Anyway, should we talk about the secret life of bees at the Almeida?
Yes, let's.
Gather nectar, bring it home. Make the honey, fill the comb. Do your work, die with grace.
So you two saw this, I didn't. Please tell me, this was based off a best-selling novel, I think, Nick.
Yes, it's based on the best-selling novel by Sue Monk Kidd from, I believe, 2001. It was made
2002, I think.
I think it was written in 2001 and won an award in 2002.
Fair enough.
We've got to
Anyway.
get this sort of thing right.
Webs.
Our listeners expect.
Jokes, not facts. In this, it was made into a film in 2008, and now it is a stage musical. A really rather unusual one, I would say. The music is by Duncan Sheik, who turned Spring Awakening into a musical and American Psycho into a musical, so he has form.
Yeah, he was
on
sitting
slightly
next to me
peculiar-
in the
was he?
first half of the opening night, and he was quite physically invested.
Right.
He was very sort of
Conducting in
bouncing
his
and
seat, was he?
conducting
Yes,
yes.
yeah. And the book is by Lynn Nottage, who is a terrific, is so far the first and only woman to win 2 Pulitzer Prizes. She's won every award going, including our award for Best Play for Sweat at the Don Mar
Fabulous
Warehouse,
play.
some
Amazing.
years back, yes. She's a tremendous writer. Again, I mean, not the sort of person you necessarily immediately think of to work on a musical. The lyrics are by a veteran New York lyricist, Susan Birkenhead, and it's directed by Whitney White, whose name I know but whose work I'm not familiar with, who I think is quite sort of avant-garde and cutting edge. So it's a really strange confluence, and it's a really strange product, wouldn't you say, Nancy?
It is. I read a review of the US run, because it was in the States before, that described it as cross-pollinating the secret garden with the colour purple, which is actually quite a good description,
I wish I'd come up with that.
I know, that's exactly what I thought when I read it.
Cross-pollination joke, yeah.
Exactly. And I think it's quite a good description, because it's about this sort of sisterhood of women, black women in the period when Lyndon B. Johnson has just signed in voting rights for people of
It's
colour
the
in
Civil
the
Rights
US.
Act of 1964.
Yes, exactly. And 2 young women, one black and one white, come as sort of, I don't know, fugitives in a way to come and stay with them. And it's, about redemption and about sort of keeping the outside world and the bad things out, but them seeping in and all of that kind of stuff. Those 2 worlds, they are very much a collision, and they don't really, I don't know, it's a very strange tonal mix.
It's
isn't it?
it's really sort of polarised, isn't it, between the sort of brutal reality of racism in the 1960s Deep South. It's set in South Carolina. So, it is about the Mississippi murders of that time, the church burnings, but on top of it is this rather sort of fairy tale account of female sisterhood and togetherness and lack of difference and things like
quite
that.
syrupy in places.
It is
which
quite
is not
syrupy, yeah.
Lynn Nottage's vibe at all.
No.
And it is very moving as well in parts, I think. And the moments of sort of genuine horror, of which there are a couple, are dealt with quite deftly, I think. There's some violence which is done in slow motion, which is, I think that's actually very effective, because it
I
makes
agree.
it watchable,
Yeah.
but it's still really horrible.
Yes.
But there was quite a small child, the daughter of one of the creatives in the audience when I saw it, and there was a bit, and he sort of leaned forward to her and said, now remember that there are the bits where you put your hands over your eyes.
Right,
Because
yes,
it was a bit,
yes.
I wouldn't recommend it for a 4-year-old. But
it's good that it works, because that slow motion stuff can also look can often look
mortifying.
very student production.
Yeah, and
and
there,
if it goes
there
wrong.
is a
works.
certain sort of stylisation and staginess here, which does feel a bit student production-y to the acting. There's a lot of people pressing their hands to their breasts and rolling their eyes to the skies, and putting on very, very solemn faces when they're delivering very, very solemn lines. I just found the whole thing quite enthralling, but also quite baffling in lots of
I know,
ways.
it's funny, isn't it? I tell you what, though, the music,
Yeah.
it's a musical, so let's talk about that.
Yeah.
Duncan Shaick's music, and I think particularly the vocal arrangements, which I think are by Jason Hart, are really lush.
Yes.
They are very, very beautiful. And I think the singing is pretty knockout.
Oh, what sorrows they must bear, what sustains them will never die. The mother is always there in the symphony of winds.
I agree. The best moments of the score, I think, are when it's at its bluesiest or almost gospel. Those songs are amazingly powerful, and they do trust the performers' voices.
Yeah, there's a couple called Take a Hold of My Soul and Our Lady of Chains, which are like big ensemble numbers, and they are just absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah.
There was a lot of whooping in the audience after those. I want to shout out to, I think, Rachel June as August, who is the kind of matriarch of this group of women.
The Queen Bee, if you like.
The Queen Bee, if you will. And, Ava Brennan, who plays her sister June, and they have this argument number called Trouble in the House, which I think is electrifying.
Yes.
That's really, really good.
I agree. The two leads are Eleanor Worthington Cox and Abiona Omonua, who are both physically quite small people, but just both have these enormous voices as well,
huge.
which they sort of haul out from the depths of their being and sort of hurl into the audience. It's very passionate, very good, really, really deeply moving, which again is slightly strange because their characterizations are rather thin.
Yeah, in fact, all the characterisation is quite
characterisations
thin. You
are
get a
very
real feeling from this, don't you? I mean, we've talked in the last few weeks about literary adaptations, mainly with A Little Life, which, is nearly 3 hours long, which you kind of need for an 800-page novel, but it feels like a good adaptation of a novel
Nearly
for
4
the
hours
stage.
long, rather than 3 hours long.
Yep, I was so clearly kind of blocked that out, but nearly 4 hours long. But this one this one is only just over 2 hours, and it feels like it feels like there must be more. Like, it doesn't feel as rich, certainly in terms of the characterisation, as you say. Like, everyone is, and August particularly as the matriarch feels very sort of magical,
Very
which
idealised and magical,
bit of a
yes.
cliche, and that doesn't. I don't think that's. I just wanted to know a bit more about them.
Yeah.
The thing is, there's a lot to criticise, but I did find it very moving, and it's not at all boring in any way.
We did on a previous podcast talk about maybe there's something to be said for not entirely understanding shows, for appreciating them on a sort of visceral level. And I found myself thinking maybe I'm wrong to try and impose a sort of rigid narrative structure onto this, and I should just enjoy the way it mashes stuff up and thrives on sort of clash and contrast.
Also, it looks beautiful.
It does look beautiful.
The set is lovely.
It does have this sort of honeyed, Secret Life of Bees, glow to the whole thing, doesn't it?
It's got to be deliberate, surely.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really lovely.
Yeah, and there's a slight sort of sense of the set is a sort of outline of a house that a child would draw, or a barn. So you do get this very simple set of sort of simple rural lives, I think, lived, but also lives which are lived under exposed conditions, I suppose, and conditions of threat. So yeah, so interesting. We were talking about shows transferring earlier. I know when we reviewed Tammy Faye at the Almeida, we all thought that was a sort of primer run with a view to a larger life. This show's already been in New York. I think somebody at the Almeida must have really believed in it and thought, I really, really want to bring this over and put it on for a relatively short run. It's got a relatively big cast. It's going to be quite an expensive thing to mount.
Yeah, you've got to just assume that they're hoping to get it into the West End.
Maybe.
And
the fans of the novel, I suppose.
Well, yeah,
it's
it was a huge hit, the
yeah.
novel. And I would be interested. I have read the book, but it must have been 20 years ago, and I remember nothing about it. So I would really like to hear from someone who has read it recently and then sees the show, because I'd love to know sort of how they feel about how that was brought to life.
Listeners, do write in.
Indeed,
Yes, indeed.
exactly.
Yeah.
Right, it's time for a quick ad break. Coming up, Lenny Henry and Lynette Linton join us to chat about their new show, August in England.
In the meantime, why not give our pod a rating and hit subscribe?
Hi, I'm Giles Torreira, and you are listening to the Evening Standard Theatre Podcast.
Welcome back to the Evening Standard Theatre Podcast. I'm at the Bush Theatre with artistic director Lynette Linton and Sir Lenny Henry in a break from rehearsals of Lenny's debut play, August in England, which starts previews on April 28th. Lenny and Lynette, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
It's nice to be here.
Lenny, could you briefly give us a quick rundown of the play?
August in England was inspired by the Windrush scandal that we've all been going through pre-lockdown and through lockdown and post-lockdown. Like everybody, I was horrified by the things I was reading, and it made me want to do something, because Lynette and I were talking about, well, what are we going to do at the Bush then? You've got to come to Lynette. Is very persistent. When are you coming to the Bush, man? Every time I saw her, so I had this thing that it should be about the Windrush, post-Windrush, because my mum came over in 58. She didn't come over on the Windrush.
Right.
She was very annoyed when there were no camera crews there to meet her and ask her to sing a calypso or something. So I thought, yeah, those people have problems too. You know, my sister Kay came over on my dad's passport. So this could have happened to any of my older brothers and sisters. So it's really lived with me in my heart. And watching people talking about it on the telly and listening to them, it's really moved me, because they came here first when streets were cold and worked very, very hard. And what's happened is they're being treated in a way that is not commensurate to their effort, to their input to the country. So I feel that August is a bit like that. He's worked hard, he's paid his taxes, he's paid his dues, and why is he being treated like this? We don't know. So the play is an attempt to show us a man being hit by a double-decker bus late in life.
And it came, didn't it, from another project that you did for the BBC, Soon Gone?
It was inspired by Soon Gone, yeah. My production company, Douglas Road Productions, made 8 15-minute monologues for BBC Two, I think. And it was all about the experience of, from people who'd arrived on the Windrush to present day, several generations of one family. But really, this was genuinely inspired by reading the story of the lady who worked at the Commons, who was suddenly told she didn't have leave to remain, or Michael Braithwaite, who was an incredibly valued teacher of special needs kids, who was just told he had to get out because he was an illegal immigrant. Interestingly, we had some contributors, didn't we, come in and talk to us about what's happened to them, and it was just devastating.
Listening to our contributors talk about their personal experiences, it was incredibly moving, but it makes me very angry, because you're literally listening to something and you're like, what, the whole time? How did that happen? How was it allowed to happen? Why wasn't it stopped sooner? Why wasn't it reported sooner? Why, all of those questions, it really doesn't make any sense.
A lot of they and them going on when you talk to the contributors. They talk about them and they, and it's very Big Brothery, very 1984-y. This sense of there's a faceless person out there sending these almost like AI-generated documents to people that are just about comprehensible. And you kind of think, I think this means they want me to leave tomorrow. This is a very weird time we're living in.
That's what we've been talking a lot about in terms of like the language of these letters and the language of how people were being spoken to. And you're like, what are you saying? So it doesn't make sense, but also you're using language that
Is this English?
What are you
just call me, or why don't you just send me a letter written in English? I've got some questions about you. It's fine, don't worry. We just need your passport and da-da-da. It's going to be fine, don't worry. Rather than we regret to inform you that long residence in the United Kingdom alone does not confer British nationality.
It feels as well that as if it's not really getting any better. I mean, there is so much kind of rhetoric around, isn't there, about and in some cases from people whose parents or grandparents took a similar route from somewhere else to come here. That's quite bewildering, isn't it?
To see a brown person saying, stop the boats. Yeah, it is confusing. It is weird. But remember, there's a whole thing about folklore, L-O-R-E, where people join something and they take on the law of the thing they've joined. So they have to parrot whatever the law is of that particular institution to fit in. And I see that a lot in what's going on here. It's also very convenient. You can blame that person. It's very convenient for those people to go, oh, it wasn't us, it was them. Whereas actually they're the ones writing the script.
Lynette, it feels like that story as well, the Windrush story, and for other people who didn't come over on that ship but have been sent home or threatened with it is sort of disappearing. So I suppose that speaks to the importance of making art about these things so that the stories stay alive, doesn't it?
Absolutely. I think when the scandal broke, I remember having a couple of conversations with people who had never even heard of the Windrush.
Oh.
And it was that moment where I just went, our history in this country isn't taught. We know this, we have these conversations, but for somebody to be like, what's the Windrush? I remember, and being ashamed of the fact they didn't know was a moment where I just went, wow, like we really don't educate how this country came to be and where we've ended up. So that was the first problem, and then on top of that, the scandal. So so it's really important that we're using theatre and art to make sure that we understand how this country came to where it is today, because sometimes I think that conversation and the contribution of the Caribbean people, specifically because that's what we're talking about with this play, gets really overlooked. And obviously there's been loads of things recently since the scandal broke about, let's talk about it, but it took so long for that to be a conversation, you know?
It should just be in the cultural...
It should just be in the history books.
It should be in the history book. I was never taught about slavery or Windrush or anything at my school. And it wasn't until I took an interest myself in my own history that I started to find out things, literally being in Norman Beaton's house and seeing all these books, particularly Peter Fryer's Staying Power, to suddenly realise that black people have been in Britain since Hadrian's Wall, and Tudors and Edwardians. We've been in this country. We've helped to build this country. And then, the Commonwealth and all of that, having a passport that says UK colonial passport, giving you access to any part of the empire. To come here and be treated like that is appalling. So not to have that story in your school books, to only be learning about Henry VIII and Francis Drake and not learning about how people contributed to slavery and, the whole thing of we're only here because you were there. Yeah. If you had a basic working knowledge of that at school, you'd be going, okay, good, I know that. But if you don't have it, then there's an ignorance going on, and ignorance is the enemy. I've learned a lot from going to the movies and going to the theatre. So if that's what we're here for, good. We're not just here to make you laugh. And happy and jolly. We're here to go, this is going to be entertaining, but look at this as well.
Yeah.
We're telling you this as well. And this play, because I know people are going to go, one-man show, Lenny Henry, hooray, jokes. There are jokes, but it's more about the whole thing. It's more of a holistic thing. You're learning about someone's life, and what Lynette and Daniel have been doing is absolutely going, okay, that's great, but why don't we try it like this? Kind of try and make a story where it's a continuing narrative, so they can, because jokes are just like joke. It's not that. So if people are coming expecting that, hopefully they relax after the first 10 minutes and go, it's not that, but this is still valid. And it's just finding another way to deliver the story.
And that's Daniel Bailey, who's co-directing with you, isn't it?
Yeah, 2 years ago. And how long have we been chatting? Maybe like 3 years? Pre-COVID. I don't even know where we are now. Pre-COVID. If you were telling me I was going to be directing Lenny Henry, I'd have been like, is it? Are you sure? Because I grew up watching Lenny. My family are all like, when am I coming in to meet him? All the time. Like, my mum's calling me, can I come in? Like, But what I'm loving about this process with Dan as well is that we are all learning so much from each other. You're working incredibly hard, but I'm learning so much from watching you, which is true. It's really true.
Thank you.
The way you're able to carry comedy in a space is extraordinary. And what I love is what you've kind of alluded to, is that me and Dan are then able to kind of go, this is brilliant, all right, let's pause. And then how do we tell that bit of the story?
And your rehearsal room, I know, is one that has a lot of music in it. So what are you dancing to at the beginning of your rehearsals?
I think let's not get it twisted. What happens at the beginning of the rehearsal day is a kind of encouragement to release energy. Because usually you come into a rehearsal room and it's a bit depressing, But what Lynette and Daniel try to do is go, right, there's a cup of tea, there's a chat, and then, right, we're going to move. And then it's about movement. And suddenly there's this energy build-up, isn't there? Mm-hmm. What's lovely is A, exchange of playlists and ideas, B, this sense of, and these guys can really, I just imagine Lynette as 14-year-old looking in the mirror and going, doing Destiny's Child, and doing all the movements, say my name, shamalama baby, and just, it's incredibly choreographed. I'm in the corner doing dad dancing. These guys are doing moves. It's amazing.
I think we should do that every morning
Absolutely.
at the Evening Standard.
I'd
love to see the newsroom do that.
You know, even just the tube, travelling on the tube, you get smaller.
Yeah.
You're vexed because it's late or whatever it is. Something coming in and knowing you're going to be able to shake it all off is
That's great.
It's such an important thing.
And sometimes I've noticed you don't want to do it, but then when it's a kind of, come on, we're all moving, suddenly you go, oh, I've got to dance. It's great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because if you come in and you didn't want to do it, and then they put on your favourite record and you dance, it's a release.
Lenny and Lynette, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much. Thank
now we're going to
you.
put some records on. Get down, get down.
What?
Get down, get down.
That was Lenny Henry and Lynette Linton speaking to me at the Bush Theatre.
Let's have a quick break, after which we'll be reviewing Private Lives at the Donmar Warehouse, starring Rachel Sterling and Stephen Mangan.
Hi, I'm Marisha Wallace, and you're listening to the Evening Standard Theatre Podcast.
Welcome back. Our second review this week is Private Lives at the Donmar Warehouse.
Yeah, this was a team trip of sorts. Nancy and I went to see it right after we recorded last week's show, which you can listen to after this episode if you haven't yet done so. This is the first production since the announcement that the current artistic director of the Donmar, Michael Longhurst, will be stepping down. He's leaving next February after 5 years in the role, and I got the feeling this was designed to sort of set a mark on his time there, which I think has not been an unbridled success, I would say.
No, well, neither is this.
And Nick, you went to see Private Lives last night, didn't you? And I think we're all agreed this isn't an unbridled success either, is it?
No.
We should probably tell people, on the unlikely event that people don't know Private Lives, it is about a couple of typical Noel. They probably are the quintessential Noel Coward couple. Brittle, wealthy, despite having no apparent means of support, international, clipped, pyjama-wearing, chain-smoking, witticism spewing poshos. When we first meet them, they are divorced, but they meet on adjoining balconies in the south of France during honeymoons to their respective second spouses. It's regularly revived, sort of about every 10 years.
Although I imagine not recently.
Well, expand on that, Mr. Clark.
Well, so as you say, you don't need to explain the backstory. I had never seen this, actually. This was a first for me, and I left totally flummoxed. I arrived thinking, oh, it'll be this lovely light throwing off of witticisms left, right and centre about social mores of the 1930s. And what we got was this extraordinary, I suppose, sort of vicious sub-Wildian show about domestic violence. I was totally wrong-footed by it. Now, I know that the production has leaned into this. This is not how it's normally presented, and all power to that. But for me,
a lot of other reviews are sort of branding it as Dark Coward in the same way that people are branding Oklahoma as Sexy Oklahoma. It's a sort of reinvention.
The problem is the play doesn't hold it. So when you try and take these characters and make them social realist monsters who abuse each other and fight, the problem is, if you read the text of these light sort of throwaway lines, there is no exploration of why they do this, who they are, and about what the impact of this is. And I really think, we talk about audiences a lot. They didn't really know what to think about this, because a lot of these jokes about beating each other up in the original were clearly meant to be funny.
Yeah.
Yes.
And now a lot of people thought, that you could hear a pin drop every now and again. Sometimes people did laugh because it was supposed to be funny, but you're like, oh, ick, this is not funny. So I left just thinking, what was that?
What about you, Nancy? How did you find it?
It's funny, isn't it? The message seems to be, aren't all people absolutely ghastly? Isn't that funny? It's really bleak.
Yeah, they are really ghastly people.
As soon as those scenes, particularly the scenes where they start fighting, it's so uncomfortable.
When he grips her neck.
Oh God, that happens several times, and it's really, really difficult to see. I was actually slightly surprised to find. I don't know. Is there a trigger warning anywhere? I don't know, because it's genuinely quite horrible.
Yeah,
it's true. I've never seen it presented in that way before. Usually, it's it's just a lot more larky. Elliot, particularly, who's played by Stephen Mangan, they're both casually cruel to each other, but that kind of casual cruelty feels very different in a man. It's much more, it hits differently in every sense, essentially, when you have that physical power to back it up. To me, Mangan feels just a bit too dangerous for this to really be the kind of thing that it used to be.
I think the way it used to be got away with quite often was that Eliot was played by quite often, sort of wispy, coward-like figures, and there's been a trend in recent years. Stephen Mangan is a big bloke. He's physically imposing.
I was expecting it to be a lot funnier than it was, and I don't know, it's because of the tone of it means you have to take out or certainly lower the larkiness and lower the badumch.
It's really tonally uneven. I mean, that's the thing, that there are these, stark, horrible the whole thing feels slightly creepy and dark, but then you do still have these occasional witticisms zinging out to tumbleweed, really. There are funny lines that just die on stage there because
yeah
they do.
I rather like Rachel Sterling, because she manages to find a bit of nuance in a character that studiously avoids it, but Eliot is just, he's the kind of person you'd be like briefly amused by at dinner and then you'd avoid for the rest of the holiday. He's just it's absolutely awful, and you'd just be a bit like, can we not hang out with them because I really don't like him.
This is the best I've seen Rachel Sterling on stage, and I'm criticising these performances much more in sorrow than in anger, because I am professionally, and I've met both of them in interviews several times. I've reviewed, their performances over the decades, and they're both actors who I value and personally like.
Yeah, and I think it's a direction thing. I mean, it's clearly a decision.
I think Stephen Mangan looks really uncomfortable in this.
I totally agree.
You can sort of see his eyes screaming, "Get me out of here!"
And that hampers the first half. The pacing didn't quite work for me. It was quite slow. In the second half, he gets into it a lot more.
The other actors here are Laura Carmichael from Downton Abbey, who has virtually nothing to work with here, I think it's safe to say, and Sargon Yelda, who has possibly even less to do.
Yeah, I mean, they do as well as they can. My God, they claw something out of this.
Yeah.
They really, but that couple is, that pair, they're not a couple. They are seriously sort of, they're basically just foils for what I think in the original sort of stagings would usually be the fun couple, which is Eliot and Amanda.
Yeah, they're the straight man and woman, aren't they?
Yeah, exactly.
He's that sort of 30s screwbally type of, those are the boring normals, and these are the fun, crazy, they fight, but they're great, they're sexy and fun, whereas in this production they weren't any of those things.
No,
there's also a rather mordant string duo on stage who also have a fight. You sort of think,
that was quite funny. That was quite funny.
Okay, all right, we'll give them that one then.
But it is unremittingly bleak, actually. When you look back on it, you're like, oh God, like I don't want to spend any time with any of these people ever again. But also, can I ever spend any time with anyone ever again?
From never having seen it before, I don't really want to see it again. But if you've seen it before, is this a sort of bold, interesting take on it? I'm trying to work out what.
It's a bold take on it, but not an interesting one. Is what I'd say. I think the weird thing is, I remember talking to Lucy Bailey, the director, one time, who classes Coward as a radical. And if you think about the time he was writing, the sort of relationships he was describing, the lightness with which he discussed divorce and sort of polyamorous relationships, if we think of Design for Living and things like that.
That's wonderful.
He is quite a radical guy, and he is worthy of reappraisal. I just don't think this one works. I mean, weirdly, this play is almost 100 years old now. It premiered in 1930s, and I suppose it's just one of those things that he's seemed such a constant presence that.
But boy, does it feel it!
It really does feel it.
It's
doesn't it?
creaky.
Yes.
Don't worry, Nick. We'll never make you see another one.
Well, I love that sort of Woodhousey. I was expecting a Wildian Woodhousey. I was thinking this is going to be a great fun night at the theatre.
Yes. Yeah.
That's it for this week's episode of the Evening Standard Theatre Podcast.
You can find all our reviews and news online at standard.co.uk and all our other episodes wherever you get your podcasts.
And of course, if you haven't yet done so, hit follow or subscribe so you'll always be reminded when a new episode drops in.
See you next Sunday.